His father ruled with iron fists. He ruled with silken hands and gave one of them to his lover. This is how a kingdom started falling, not with a war, but with a whisper. The crown didn't fit him. Edward II inherited it from a man who never smiled. Edward Longshanks, the war-hardened tyrant who crushed Wales, brutalized Scotland, and treated his enemies like weeds to be burned. And then came Edward II, who preferred music over military. He built boats, not navies. He hugged, not hunted. He found joy in festivals, carpentry, and the quiet company of men. To nobles raised on conquest, he looked like a parody. To the kingdom, he looked like a mistake. But Edward wasn't stupid. He knew he'd never match his father's shadow, so he lit his own flame. And that flame had a name, Piers Gaveston. Not a general, not a strategist, just a handsome, silver-tongued knight who made Edward feel alive. He dressed loud, laughed louder, and called barons fools in 3 languages. Edward didn't care. He gave him titles, castles, power, like a boy handing out candy. To Gaveston, it was love or lust or leverage. To the nobles, it was treason in slow motion. Every king makes enemies. But Edward's enemies weren't outside the castle. They were seated at his own damn table, and they were sharpening their knives. He wasn't born royal. He didn't earn power. He just slept next to it. And for that, Piers Gaveston would be loved, hated, hunted, and butchered. The first time the English nobles laid eyes on Gaveston, they didn't see a knight. They saw a parasite in silk. Edward gave him everything. The title of Earl of Cornwall, reserved for blood princes. Castles, gold, and command over men who'd spent decades spilling blood for the crown. A seat at the king's side. Every meal, every council, every night. To the barons, it was humiliation. They weren't just being ignored. They were being mocked by a man who wore purple like a peacock and whispered jokes in the king's ear while war brewed outside. But Edward was blind, or worse, he didn't care. The tighter they squeezed him to exile Gaveston, the faster he brought him back. Once, twice, 3 times, until England itself cracked. In 1312, the barons had had enough. Gaveston was captured, not by foreign enemies, but by English lords. They didn't wait for trial. They didn't ask the king. They dragged him out, laughed in his face, and hacked his head off by the roadside. Edward was shattered. The man who made him feel safe, who made him feel seen, was now a headless body dumped in a ditch. But instead of learning the lesson, power doesn't protect love, Edward doubled down. He turned cold, bitter, and dangerous in a whole new way. Transition. Gaveston's death wasn't the end of royal favoritism. It was the blueprint, because next came the Despensers, and they didn't want Edward's heart. They wanted England. The first one took the king's heart, the next ones took the throne. And England, it was just collateral damage. They weren't lovers, they were worse. The Despensers didn't want affection, they wanted everything. Hugh Despenser, the younger, wasn't just ambitious. He was greedy, calculating, and venomous. The kind of man who didn't steal what he wanted. He made you hand it over while thanking him for it. And Edward, still broken from Gaveston's murder, still aching for loyalty, still chasing shadows of comfort in the worst possible men. He gave the Despensers the keys to the kingdom. Within months, England looked different. Barons were stripped of land. Rivals were imprisoned without trial. Dissenters disappeared. And those who dared to complain, they didn't get silenced. They got tortured. Bodies started showing up. Tongues cut out. Eyes gouged. Whole families starved into surrender. All under the name of royal authority. But it wasn't the king running the show anymore. It was Hugh and his father, parading through court like crowned leeches. Outside the palace, famine hit. Scotland humiliated England at Bannockburn. The treasury bled dry, and the people, they stopped praying for their king. They started whispering about removing him, but inside, Edward clung harder, to Hugh, to the illusion of control, to the fantasy that love, twisted, cruel love would save him again. It wouldn't, because when the nobility hates your lover, they rebel. But when the queen hates your lover, she declares war. He humiliated her. He stripped her of power. He chose another man over his own wife. So she crossed the sea, opened her arms to a rebel, and came back to burn his world down. Isabella wasn't born to take orders. She was the daughter of the King of France. She spoke 5 languages, rode like a knight, and could read a room faster than most men could draw a sword. But she married Edward II. And for years, she watched him hand the kingdom to Hugh Despenser like a lovesick fool. She swallowed insult after insult, her lands taken, her titles erased, her access to power severed, and then they touched her son. The heir to the throne, Edward III, was being raised under Despenser's rules, not hers. That was the final line. So she smiled. She played the obedient queen, and then she asked Edward for permission to visit her brother in France. He said yes. He thought she needed a break. He didn't know she was packing a war. In France, Isabella didn't just vent, she seduced rebellion. Roger Mortimer, disgraced noble, brilliant traitor. She didn't just sleep with him, she handed him a crown made of resentment. And together they made a list. Every noble the Despensers ruined. Every baron waiting to strike. Every knight tired of obeying a puppet king. The invasion wasn't noble, it was personal. They landed with a few ships and a burning purpose. And England, tired, starving, furious, opened the gates. Edward's army melted. His allies fled. Even his capital didn't fight for him. The Despensers were caught and torn apart, literally. Hugh the Elder, hanged and disemboweled. Hugh the Younger, genitals cut off, entrails burned before his eyes, and then quartered for the crowds. It wasn't execution. It was symbolic castration. A message. You replaced a queen with a dog, now die like one. And Edward, no crown, no throne, just a fugitive hiding in the mud. They found him, wet, filthy, shaking. Dragged him from a ditch like a criminal, and locked him in a place even ghosts feared. Berkeley Castle. Cold stone, no escape. A place where kings don't live. They whisper. They didn't hang him. They didn't behead him. They burned him from the inside out. Not to kill him, to erase him. Berkeley Castle wasn't a prison. It was a grave waiting for a pulse. Edward II arrived in chains, soaked in mud, stripped of everything but breath. No court, no verdict, no dignity. Just stone walls, cold meals, and the smell of decay in the air. They didn't want him dead, not yet. They wanted him broken, screaming, begging, forgotten. No royal records, no orders signed. But the whispers, they say it happened at night. 2 men, a red-hot poker, no blade, no blood, just smoke. Why that method? Because Edward had loved men. So they made his death a mockery of that love. A punishment tailored to his sin in their eyes. No wound, no scars, just the stench of burnt flesh. And silence so thick it broke the guards. Was it true? Some say yes. Some say it was rumor, propaganda to smear him. Others believe he survived, smuggled out, lived in exile as a shadow of himself. But does it matter? When a king becomes a ghost, the body is just paperwork. England didn't mourn. It moved on, fast. The boy, Edward III, was crowned. The she-wolf got her throne for a time. Mortimer ruled from behind curtains until his own execution. And Edward II, he became a warning, a riddle, a rotten memory shoved under centuries of stone. But even in death, he refused to disappear. Because history doesn't forget kings who love wrong, rule wrong, and die in ways too cruel to write down. They erased his name, mocked his memory, but centuries later, we're still talking about him. Maybe that's the cruelest twist of all. Edward II didn't just die, he vanished. No grand funeral, no royal tomb. Just rumors, whispers, and an empty crown passed to a boy not old enough to understand the blood still drying on it. But death doesn't always mean disappearance. His story refused to rot. Poets turned him into a symbol. Playwrights painted him as a martyr of love. Historians argued over his fall. Was it weakness? Was it betrayal? Was it fate? And modern voices. Some say he was England's first queer monarch, a victim of a world that demanded kings be killers, not humans. Others call him naive, a man-child who mistook affection for leadership and let wolves dress like lovers. There's even a theory that he lived, that he escaped, that a corpse was swapped, that he died not in Berkeley, but in a monastery far from screams. Would that change anything? Maybe, maybe not, because the Edward who mattered, the idea of him, was already dead the moment England decided a king couldn't be soft. His reign left scars, civil war, broken alliances, humiliation on the battlefield, but it also left questions. What happens when a crown lands on the wrong head? Can a kingdom survive a king who feels too much? And was Edward II a failure, or simply born in the wrong century? He wasn't a tyrant, he wasn't a warrior, he wasn't even a king they understood. He was a man with too much heart, in a world that only respected the sword, and for that, they silenced him with fire. But centuries later, he still haunts the throne he lost. So what do you think? Was Edward II a tragic soul ahead of his time, or just a man who let love blind him until it burned down a kingdom? Tell us in the comments. And if you want more stories of power, betrayal, and beautiful ruin, hit that subscribe button, because this was just one king, and history is full of corpses with crowns.